Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Njehia. Angela is a founding member and director of Tierranjani Africa, a boutique tourism consultancy based in Nairobi that operates across Africa. Angela, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
Thank you, Chad, for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to share what I can on tourism in Africa.
It's a pleasure. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus, experience the best of Africa.
Angela, what is the one thing nobody knows about you? It could be a turning point in your life or something major that you'd like to share.
I guess there's different things that people don't know about me. What people mainly know about me is that I'm extremely passionate about sustainable tourism in Africa and live to see intra-Africa grow. What they also don't know about me is that I'm also a bit of a book lover. When I do get the chance and I'm not out there preaching the gospel of sustainability, I'll probably be reading a book and just enjoying time out in the nature. I love forests, by the way. So I love to get away into the wild and just read a book because it gives me so much clarity.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. So give us a rough idea. Who's Angela?
Angela is not a big name, but a name that is very vocal in African tourism. I started my journey in tourism almost slightly above 15 years ago, I would say about 17, 18 years ago. And I started from the very bottom of tourism, like every other African just trying to live in a day. Started from working in the front office in a tourism tour operator organization, slowly worked my way through to the top management. Obviously, it took time. Worked in tourism operations, traveled across the world promoting African tourism, telling the world how beautiful Africa is. Then I slowly started into seeing that our beautiful wildlife, our beautiful beaches were slowly dying. And I realized as much as it was fantastic to bring in and woo in travelers and we earn money and foreign exchange, it also meant that the children coming after me, my children, and the children of my children would probably not be able to share in that beauty. So about 8 years ago, I started working on what we know as sustainable tourism. Often we've heard people talk about sustainability, but in tourism, sustainability represents a balance between the people, the host communities. It represents a balance between our ecosystems, but it also means that we can earn economically, we can diversify our economy through tourism, but ensure that we are future-proofing our most valued product. And most of these are natural resources. So Angela basically started her journey there, worked now in tourism operations. In 2019, decided to move into tourism development because through tourism development, it meant that I could work with communities, I could work with wildlife ecosystems, I could work with the beaches that we have in Africa and directly impact. And it was impact that could be measurable. So that is when I co-founded Tierranjani Africa, a boutique tourism consultancy based in Nairobi. And in 3 years, we have now a footprint of our work in 10 African countries. Obviously, because we're stand in East Africa in Nairobi, then East Africa carries our biggest weight through the EAC countries. We've done work within West Africa, in Gambia, in Ghana, and also in Sierra Leone.
Amazing. You started in 2019 and you are in tourism. There was even COVID, but you still grew to 10 countries. So this is very powerful. And what a way to go. Congratulations. Give us an insight into Tierranjani Africa Limited. What do you do?
So Tierranjani Africa is, like I said, we're a very small company, but seemingly having a good impact because there was need for it. We developed tourism strategies and policies for tourism-related organizations. So this can be tourism associations, it can be tourism commercial-based, organizations like tour operators, travel agents. It can be governments, it can be conservancies and wildlife or protected areas. So our job is to build capacity through training and developing strategies and policies. Our main aim really is to focus on delivering innovative and sustainable tourism solutions and approaches that can be adapted to future-proof our ecosystems and, our businesses as well. Saying that we actually started in 2019, most people have always asked, did you know that COVID would come in 2020? But in real sense, I think it's just one of those things that nature provided. Call it destiny, if you may, but it just came about that there was need for it because once all our travel was shut down, all airlines closed, airports closed, everything at a halt, that is when most people needed to rethink. And Tierranjani Africa gave most of our African countries and businesses an opportunity to revamp and rethink and review, readdress, you may say, their strategies, how they had planned their businesses. Most of the tourism sector businesses had never considered such a crisis. In Africa, the biggest crisis we ever had to deal with was probably Ebola, in relation to health, or probably insecurity. So a crisis in this big magnitude was something that we needed to find a way. It's like being in a maze and you're trying to find your way out. So Tierranjani was that hand that held most of these organizations through the maze to try and get them out and, see the light and do things differently moving forward. One of the projects that Tierranjani did during COVID period was through the East African Community, EAC Secretariat, and it was funded by GIZ. And it was a capacity building that actually reached over 3,500 tourism organizations across East Africa. And every week we had different topics. And the outcomes of that is that we could see businesses now, redesign their business strategies, something they had never done before, because most of them probably just fell in the tourism sector and started to provide a service, but had never thought about the business or the backbone of it. We slowly use those innovative approaches that I'm talking about, and we are hoping that, we can actually contribute towards the sustainable development of Africa.
I don't know what to call it, but you were at the right place at the right time and you had the knowledge. So that's exactly what Africa needs. We now need to create our own solutions to challenges that we face. And this goes further to sustainable tourism. We've got beautiful countries, but people don't visit them because some of them don't have animals. But yet there's a lot to learn from these countries. So thank you very much for sharing. How do you think technology has impacted tourism transformation in Africa? And what role do you see it play in the future?
Honestly, when you think about the tourism that we're experiencing globally, technology is at the heart of it. I remember one of the ways Kenya used to sustain the conservancies and the local people who live in these conservancies was to design virtual tours where people could pay for a minimal amount and they could still go on tour through tech. And I remember thinking that was amazing. But when you think deeper into what technology has done, then you realize tech has even changed the purchase process of any travel or any accommodation you may want to do. Consider now when you want to go on holiday, the first thing you do is pick up your mobile phone. You go straight into your phone, you search, I want to go to this location. and I want to stay in an accommodation of this much, and you can get all that. Yeah. So the purchase process used to be creating awareness. Now you have tech to create that awareness. It's not so hard where you have to go explaining to people what you can find in Africa, the richness, the diversity that we have. In terms of purchase, now people can pay the comfort of their homes. They don't have to bring physical, tangible cash to a travel agent or an airline. They can easily do that through e-commerce. So you realize that tourism has been changed completely with tech. And as we advance, because of the connectivity, especially in Africa, it's growing at a fast pace. It's growing at a fast range. I remember in East Africa, we were talking about growing domestic tourism. And one of the things that moved domestic tourism in terms of COVID, late 2020 into early 2021, was actually the ability to be able to pay through mobile phones, through mobile money. So that became an instant gateway to closing a sale, whereas maybe before we could have waited for people who had debit credit cards to pay for their tourism experiences. But now, with a touch of a button, you're able to do it. So I think technology is certainly opening up tourism. Technology is not going anywhere. So it's finding ways in which it can better the experience, but also I think finding ways in which it can impact our local communities.
Certainly, you talk about the connectivity. It's unbelievable the numbers of people with mobile phones on the continent. So that's a huge opportunity. So thank you very much for sharing. What advice would you give leaders trying to achieve sustainable results in tourism development?
Chad, this is an observation I made, and maybe because I started out as working from the bottom in tourism, then educated myself into tourism and continue to do so. One of the biggest challenges that leaders face is having that breakthrough to the local people. But it's because we go in with very huge documents. I'm one who creates strategies, so I know. And the easier we make people understand what sustainability is, the more we break it down for them so that it's easy to understand, then it means it becomes practically applicable. But the more we go in with our big scientific terms, then we turn people away because they're probably thinking it's about change. And people's reaction to change is very different. People fear change. So once we go in with big terms and big plans, and sometimes we lose them. One of the ways I like to communicate to organizations that I work with in Tierranjani is by looking at the most simplest form to make them understand. I now look at climate change, what we all talk about, yeah? We hear everybody talking about climate action, but we never really break it down. I found it easier to explain it to, a local grandmother out there in the rural by saying it's as simple as ensuring the food that we have does not end up in a landmine somewhere. It's about saying the simplest things. For example, when we talk about planting, how can we use the plastic bottles that are already there to be used for drip irrigation? Because maybe we don't have funds to do pipe irrigation in our plants. So it's finding the most simplest way. Then they're able to understand what sustainability is, and then we can start to work towards our goal and we can meet our goals. I like to look at things from two different sides. There's one positive side of COVID. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it made us rethink of the things that we do and question, can we do it in another way? But sadly, within that space, we also forgot about climate change. And then now we are back to talking about it. And I'm like, it's everyone's responsibility. COVID was a virus that threatened all of us. Now imagine when climate hits, it won't be, Chad is in this part where they planted trees, so they'll survive. It will be everybody. And that's why I say Sustainability is a collective responsibility for each one of us. It's not just a thing of the leaders. They may write the policies, but it is our responsibility to ensure that we survive. And that's what sustainability is about.
Sustainability is a responsibility for each one of us to survive. That's very powerful. And I mean, we saw it with COVID. The whole world closed down. Yet the issue started in China. So climate change is even bigger because it's touching everywhere. We see how the temperatures are changing in different parts. At some point, people might have thought Africa might not be affected, but we see the effects. So thank you very much for sharing. Before we continue, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus, experience the best of Africa.
So, Angela, what impact has culture had on tourism industry from your experience of interacting with people from different cultures?
I believe people want to connect, Chad. People want a sense of belonging. People thrive when there is an understanding of where they come from. I think Ghana was one of the countries that explored culture tourism in new modern day age, where they grew the slave trade routes. And we could see Black Africans leaving across the world, coming back home to be able to engage with their culture, learn where they came from. So you realize that culture is not something we can escape. And it is beautiful because it gives people that sense of belonging. Every human being wants a sense of belonging. That is why when you meet people, the first thing they ask you is, where are you from? You say your name, people never ask you, what do you do? The next question is usually, where are you from? Because of that sense of belonging. So culture is definitely one to grow. And in Africa, we have so many cultures. I mean, I think of the times I've gone to West Africa and I've been treated to the West African food. I've been given cassava leaves, fufu, and then you move into East Africa, for example, and you have your ugali and nyama choma, and that there is culture. We often tend to think culture is only Kenyan, so I'm going to say this, is when you see a Maasai adorned in their bright, colorful shukas and the beads, or the Rwandese women in their traditional Rwandese outfits. That is a component of culture. But there's also modern day culture, the kind of music that Africa is growing, vibrant music, vibrant crafts. That is all culture. So you realize that these experiences is what everyone across the continent, across the world wants to experience. People want to come and feel that sense of belonging that we're talking about. They want to come and connect. And this is why simple experiences of the local natives, for example, coming to cook in Africa, greens using a pot and, the 3 stones jiko that we use with firewood, that's an experience that people don't necessarily have. And that's culture. So it's a mixture of contemporary and traditional. It's a good blend. And now we realize that tourism sits on that as a growing component. We're moving away from just the wildlife, the beaches is fantastic, but also this culture is phenomenal.
Interesting to look at it from a sense of belonging. And, whenever you meet anyone, they'll want to know where you come from. Or even if you're African, they'll say, so which part of Africa are you from? So that's quite interesting to look at it that way. Based on your travel, what other business opportunities have you seen in Africa? It could be from a travel perspective.
I think Africa is certainly the richest continent on the globe. I'll say it, yeah. I'm one of those who walk around proudly African. And if you look at the opportunities, even moving beyond tourism and even the culture we were talking about, just consider the opportunities we have, for example, in a sector like agriculture. It breaks my heart when I see, especially in the Horn of Africa, northern Kenya, Somalia, and above, people dying of hunger. Yet we have some of the most arid lands in Africa. I know a professor who once said to me, we have the capability as Africa to provide food for the whole world. So it saddens me when we look at opportunities like that and not work on them, not build upon them, working so hard that we exploit these opportunities. In this day and age, looking at the amount of possibilities that we have in agriculture, we shouldn't be seeing our fellow Africans die out of hunger. That breaks my heart. I think of other opportunities, for example, in the creative industries. When we were growing up, I remember East Africa and South Africa and West Africa were among the early believers of African music. And now it's like each and every part of Africa has their own music, which is amazing. You look at the art, the fabrics. We all love Ankara. Each one of us has some Ankara in their closets because we realize that our textiles are so rich. That's yet another opportunity. And Chad, I could go on about the opportunities that we have, but I feel we need something to slap us out and wake up and realize nobody's going to take the chance or take the risk to develop those. It's only us. So it's upon us to look at the opportunities that are there and see what can we do to grow it. So in terms of business opportunities, they're massive, massive, very huge opportunities that could create a storm, call it an economic storm. I'm one who likes to disrupt. And I say, the day Africa gets an awakening, we shall disrupt everything, child. Economically, we shall disrupt.
We're looking forward to that time and we can contribute. You mentioned about agriculture. I remember listening to Strive Masiwa, the founder of Econet Group, and he said, I quote, he says, if I was starting today, I wouldn't go in telecoms, I would go into agriculture. So that's very powerful amongst the other insights you've just shared with us. In your travel and tourism experience within Africa and across the globe, what is your opinion about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
To be honest, I think it's a fresh breath of air. It's something that has been thought of for so long, but it's something that we also didn't think about so long. What do I mean? I take it and put it in the context of travel and tourism. I always find it ridiculous to travel to North Africa from West Africa because it's probably cheaper for me to exit Africa, go to Qatar or Dubai, then come back if I was traveling, say, to Morocco. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area gives us an opportunity to look at how do we open up travel, the routings, the visas, the landing taxes for airlines, that connectivity to boost trade. And this is that awakening that I'm saying. We stand a very strong opportunity, but we could also just end up with very many policies on shelves that are never implemented. For me as an individual, what I want to see is that implementation. I want to see how we can open up the routes so that we stop this thing of people coming from different regions in Africa. It's like they're not traveling to Africa. They have to go somewhere and connect via somewhere. We need to find a harmony, a blend of how this can work for us. And if you look at the opportunities that come with opening up routes, breaking those barriers that we usually have, and I put the quotes on the barriers, then it means that I can easily move my wares from East Africa into North Africa, and North Africa can move theirs to West Africa, and West Africa can move theirs to South Africa. Now, if this is not a game changer, I'm not sure what is. This is that one thing, if we all don't wake up to it and take advantage, see how can we maximize on it, I'm not sure what will ever change Africa.
Great and interesting times ahead of us. We need to really embrace the AFCFTA, and it also reflects to Africa Continental Free Travel area. So you are spot on, and thank you for sharing that. Any books or podcasts you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Interesting. I'm a book reader, but I think one, I have to stick to be local. I do like African readers. So one of my favorites is Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He's a Kenyan writer who's been writing since the early days of independence. He is also a big figure of challenging the youth in how we reason, because he talks about, experiences that they went through in a post-colonial period and bringing it all the way to now, and challenges our mental being, because he tackles injustices, corruption, all the issues that we face every day, and Right to Dream. I'd like to recommend his book, Dreams in a Time of War, because then you realize what was happening then and what is happening now. And you realize now we're in our war of ourselves, It's in our minds. I think in terms of inspirational books, I would like to say I'm a fan of Robin Sharma. He wrote the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And my favorite book from him is The Leader Who Had No Title. I'd really recommend guys to read that, because it makes you realize that you don't have to have a big name to make an impact. And for me, impact is the purpose of why I wake up every day, to change where I can. And to quote Wangari Maathai in the story about the hummingbird, Wangari Maathai is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate from Kenya who fought for green spaces in Kenya to protect them in conservation. And she gave the story about the hummingbird, and she said, it's never about the big things that you can do. It's always about the small things you can do. And in short, how the story goes is that the forest was on fire, and then the hummingbird was moving from the river trying to put out the fire in the forest. And then the elephant, the lion, all the big animals were looking at the bird and thinking, what are they doing? But the moral of the story is this: the elephant could have gone with his big trunk and carried much more water and poured on the forest. But the hummingbird, with the small beak, kept on trying to carry drops of water to put it out. So it's about the little that you do to create an impact. It's never about having a big name or a big title or a big position. It's making change where you are.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I've also learned, I really liked Robin Sharma, but for some reason I haven't read The Leader with No Title. And I haven't read The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I've read his 5 a.m. Club and The Everyday Hero. So I've read his more recent books, but I'm definitely going to go and buy the other two. So thank you very much for sharing.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts.